She showed up at my front door just before midnight, soaked to the bone, clutching a folder of legal papers like it was the only thing keeping her alive. 5 days later, she became my wife. Not because we were in love, not because either of us had planned it, but because if we did not get married before Friday, her family's century-old ranch would fall into the hands of the one man determined to destroy it. My name is Ethan Carter, and until that stormy Monday night, I believed my life would never change. The rain hammered against the windows of my old farmhouse so hard it sounded like handfuls of gravel being thrown across the glass. I had just finished checking on a sick calf and was halfway through a cold plate of beans when someone started pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. Out here in rural Montana, nobody came around that late unless something had gone terribly wrong. I opened the door. For a second, I barely recognized her. Olivia Bennett stood on my porch with rainwater dripping from every strand of her blonde hair. Her denim jacket clung to her shoulders, completely soaked, while both of her hands gripped a thick brown folder so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Ethan. She barely managed to say my name before her voice cracked. I looked beyond her into the darkness. "Did you drive?" She slowly shook her head. "No. Mason took my truck keys." That answer told me everything I needed to know. "Get inside." She stepped across the doorway, still shivering as I closed the door behind her. The warm air inside barely seemed to reach her. She stood frozen near the entrance while water dripped onto my wooden floor. I grabbed an old towel from the laundry basket and handed it to her. "What happened?" She dried her hair without answering. Olivia had always been quiet. Whenever I saw her helping around the Bennett Ranch, she carried herself like someone who never felt completely comfortable anywhere. She could spend one weekend wearing expensive clothes she brought home from college and the next fixing fences beside her father in muddy boots. I knew her, but not well. The person I truly knew had been her father, Thomas Bennett. When my parents died years earlier, Thomas had quietly checked on me without making it obvious. He helped me repair fences, lent me equipment when mine broke down, and never once made me feel like I owed him anything. Now Thomas was gone, and his daughter looked like her entire world had collapsed. "It's about Dad's will," she finally whispered. I nodded toward the kitchen. "Sit down first." "I can't." "Olivia." She looked at me for a long moment before finally walking to the kitchen table. I filled the kettle simply because I needed something to do with my hands. She opened the folder. Legal documents spread across the table, their corners damp from the rain. Most of it meant nothing to me. I understood cattle records, equipment loans, feed invoices. Lawyers had their own language. My father added a condition before he died. Olivia said quietly. "I didn't know about it until today." I frowned. "What kind of condition?" She swallowed hard. "If I'm not legally married before the deadline." She paused. "I don't inherit full control of the ranch." I stared at her. The kettle began to whistle behind me. "What?" She looked down. "My older brother Mason becomes the controlling owner." For several seconds, I couldn't find the words. "Married?" She nodded. "The attorney says Dad believed having a husband beside me would protect me." She laughed bitterly. "I guess he thought someone would keep Mason from pushing me around." "When's the deadline?" "This Friday." I looked at the calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. "Monday." That left 4 days. "And Mason?" "He came back this morning." She shook her head. "He already has developers coming to look at the property. He says the land is worth far more as luxury homes than cattle pastures." A heavy feeling settled in my chest. I'd met men like Mason before, men who looked across rolling green fields and saw nothing but dollar signs. They never saw generations of hard work, never saw memories, never saw family, only profit. Olivia slid one folded note across the table. "My dad left this with the will." I unfolded it. Only one sentence. "If anything happens to me, Ethan Carter will understand what this land truly means." I stared at those words for several seconds, then looked back at Olivia. "What are you asking me?" She met my eyes. For the first time since she'd arrived, she didn't look away. "I'm asking you to marry me." Silence filled the kitchen, even the rain seemed quieter. "Olivia, I know how crazy this sounds. I don't think you do." "I do." Her voice was steady now. "I know exactly what I'm asking." She took a slow breath. "I don't have anyone else. Mason has already convinced half the ranch workers that I can't run the place. The attorney keeps reminding me about Friday, like somehow hearing it more often will create another solution." I rubbed both hands across my face. I was exhausted, too exhausted for a conversation that could change two lives forever. "So," I asked carefully, "you're using me?" For the first time that night, she stopped moving entirely. "Yes." Then she added quietly, "But not the way you think." She looked straight at me. "I'm asking for help. I'm not going to lie and pretend this is about love. Right now it's about saving my father's ranch." Oddly enough, that honest answer affected me far more than any emotional speech could have. I looked around my old kitchen, the faded yellow walls my mother had painted years ago, the worn wooden table where my father used to spread unpaid bills every month. Since losing them, I'd kept this farm running because working hurt less than giving up. I knew what it felt like to inherit responsibility before you were ready. I knew what it felt like to have people quietly waiting for you to fail. Olivia wrapped both hands around the mug I'd placed in front of her. "I can't lose this ranch. I believe you. I truly did." Still, I slowly shook my head. "Marriage matters to me. I know." "No." I looked directly at her. "I mean it. It isn't just paperwork. It isn't something you sign because a lawyer tells you to." She lowered her eyes. "I understand. But losing my family's ranch matters too." That was the problem. She wasn't wrong. I walked toward the back door and stared out into the darkness. Beyond my property line sat the Bennett Ranch. Our fences had shared the same border for decades. Thomas Bennett had spent his life raising good cattle there. He'd worked harder than almost anyone I'd ever known. If Mason sold that land, everything Thomas built would disappear beneath bulldozers. I turned back toward Olivia. "If I agree." She immediately looked up. "There's one condition." She nodded. "No lies." She frowned. "Outside these walls, we'll do whatever we have to. But inside this house," I pointed toward the kitchen table, "we tell each other the truth. You don't pretend you're in love with me. And I won't pretend I'm some hero riding in to save the day. We both know exactly what this marriage is." She nodded slowly. "I can do that. And if things get ugly, they will. You don't hide anything from me. I won't." I studied her for another few seconds, the soaked hair, the trembling hands, the fear she was trying so desperately to hide. Finally, I nodded. "All right. We'll go to the courthouse tomorrow morning." Her shoulders relaxed, though not from relief, more like someone who'd finally accepted the weight they had no choice but to carry. "Thank you." I simply nodded. Neither of us slept much that night. The next morning we drove into town in my 15-year-old pickup truck. The heater blasted hot air while silence filled the cab. Olivia wore a simple navy blue dress beneath a tan coat. She looked like someone trying very hard to make an impossible day feel ordinary. I wore my cleanest work shirt. It still had an oil stain near one cuff. Neither of us mentioned it. The courthouse clerk looked at us curiously but asked no questions. We signed where she pointed. A tired county judge performed the ceremony. No flowers, no family, no music, just fluorescent lights buzzing overhead while rainwater dried on the floor beneath our boots. When it was over, Olivia stared at the marriage certificate like it might suddenly disappear. I looked at her. "Now we save your ranch." She nodded. But instead of looking at the paperwork, she was looking at me. And for the very first time, I realized nothing about this arrangement was going to stay simple. That afternoon, she arrived at my farmhouse carrying only 2 travel bags, 1 raincoat, and a cardboard box overflowing with financial records she no longer trusted Mason to leave alone. I showed her the spare bedroom at the end of the hallway. It still had my mother's old quilt folded neatly across the bed, the dresser drawer always stuck halfway open. The bathroom is across the hall, I said. The closet door squeaks. I'll fix it later. She nodded. Thank you. You don't have to thank me every time I point at furniture. For the first time since we'd met at my front door, she almost smiled. The first week felt like 2 strangers sharing the same roof while pretending nothing unusual had happened. Olivia moved into the spare bedroom at the end of the hallway with little more than 2 suitcases and a box full of ranch records. Every morning she asked permission before touching anything. Can I use this pan? Can I make coffee? Is it okay if I move these papers? Every time I gave her the same answer. You live here now. The words sounded strange every time I said them. At night, she quietly closed the door to the guest room while I lay awake in mine, listening to the old farmhouse settle around us. Pipes clicked inside the walls. Wind slipped beneath the eaves. Once or twice, I heard her walk into the kitchen after midnight, only to return to her room a minute later. Neither of us mentioned it. By Wednesday morning, the entire county knew we had gotten married. Small towns had always worked that way. Someone could buy a new pickup before breakfast, and by lunchtime everyone within 20 miles would know what color it was and how much they probably paid. When we stopped by the feed store, the woman behind the counter looked from Olivia's wedding ring to me before raising an eyebrow. Well, she said with a knowing smile. That happened fast. Olivia's face turned bright red. I simply placed another bag of mineral blocks on the counter. We'll take 2 more. The woman laughed quietly. I guess congratulations are in order. Thank you, Olivia answered politely. Outside, as I loaded supplies into my truck, she folded her arms across her chest. They all think I'm crazy. I shut the tailgate. No. They're curious. There's a difference. It doesn't feel different. I followed her eyes toward 2 older ranchers who stopped talking as we walked past. They'll find something new to gossip about next week. She wasn't convinced. As we climbed into the truck, she looked at me. Do you already regret saying yes? I started the engine. It's been 2 days. That's not an answer. I glanced at her. No, I don't regret it. She nodded slowly but continued staring out the window for the rest of the drive. The next morning we headed over to the Bennett Ranch. I spotted Mason's black luxury pickup before we even reached the main barn. It gleamed under the morning sun like it had never hauled anything heavier than golf clubs. Mason stood beside 2 ranch hands wearing spotless boots and an expensive wool coat that looked completely out of place on a working ranch. Olivia slowed her pace. I leaned toward her. Keep walking. She nodded. Her grip tightened around the clipboard she carried. Mason turned as we approached. A smug smile spread across his face. Well, look who finally showed up. The happy newlyweds. Olivia lifted her chin. What are you doing here? He shrugged. Checking on my property. Our father's property, she corrected. For now. He laughed. You married the first broke rancher you could find, and suddenly you think you're qualified to run this place. Neither ranch hand said a word. That bothered me more than Mason's insult. Good employees always watched carefully to see who truly held authority. Olivia opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Mason noticed. He stepped closer. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Sell the ranch. Take the money. Move somewhere nice. Start over. I took 1 step forward without thinking. Olivia noticed. So did Mason. He smiled at me. And you. He looked me up and down. Nice move, Ethan. You marry into the Bennett family and suddenly you're standing on valuable land. My fists tightened for only a moment before relaxing again. Anger never fixed broken fences. It never paid overdue loans, and it never won arguments in front of witnesses. I'm standing beside my wife. That's all. The word wife landed differently this time, not like it had in the courthouse. Heavier, real somehow. Olivia looked at me for a brief second before turning back toward her brother. Mason rolled his eyes. Sure you are. Then he addressed the ranch workers. Nobody makes any major decisions until this estate is sorted out. Olivia finally found her voice. That's not your decision. He smiled again. Isn't it? No. Her voice trembled. But it isn't. For a long moment, nobody moved. Finally, Mason shrugged. We'll see. He climbed into his truck and drove away, throwing gravel behind him. The silence he left behind felt almost louder than his insults. Olivia walked into the barn without saying a word. I found her gripping the edge of an empty horse stall. I froze. She refused to look at me. I could barely answer him. You answered. Barely. Barely counts. She finally looked up. You could have shut him down. I could have. Then why didn't you? Because if I fight every battle for you. I waited until she met my eyes. Everyone here will keep looking at me instead of you. She frowned. I don't understand. You have to become the person they follow. Not me. She didn't like my answer. I could see it on her face. But she didn't argue. Instead, we spent the rest of the afternoon inside the ranch office. Financial statements covered the desk, invoices, feed contracts, veterinary bills, equipment loans. I explained which suppliers always gave Thomas Bennett extra time during difficult seasons, and which companies smiled politely while quietly adding late fees every month. When a payment might be late, I said, tapping one invoice, call them before they call you. It makes you look like you're in control. She wrote the sentence into a notebook. I laughed. What? I wasn't giving homework. I'm not wasting good advice. For the first time all week, the tension between us eased. 2 days later, another challenge arrived. Heavy rain had weakened the west pasture fence. 3 wooden posts leaned dangerously, and one section of wire sagged low enough that curious cattle could easily push through. Ray, the ranch foreman, was already waiting with tools when we arrived. Olivia studied the damaged corner. I want the entire brace replaced. Ray nodded politely, then looked directly at me. You want it done today? I said nothing. He kept waiting. So did Olivia. I bent down and scraped dried mud off my boot with a stick. After several uncomfortable seconds, Olivia cleared her throat. Ray. He turned toward her. I said, replace it. If we patch it now, we'll just rebuild it after the next storm. It costs more. I know. Do it correctly. Nobody moved. The silence stretched for several seconds. Finally, Ray nodded. Yes, ma'am. As soon as he walked away, Olivia spun toward me. You could have helped. I did. You stared at your boot. Exactly. She glared at me for 3 full seconds. Then, the corner of her mouth lifted. That was awful. I know. I hated every second. I know. But he listened. I smiled. He did. That evening, for the first time since moving into my house, Olivia made dinner without asking where everything belonged. Scrambled eggs, fried potatoes, toast, nothing fancy. She placed a plate in front of me before sitting across the table. You skipped lunch again. I was busy. That's what you always say. Usually because it's true. She rolled her eyes. There was dirt on her cheek she hadn't noticed. Her sleeves were rolled above her elbows. She looked exhausted, but this time, she looked exhausted because she'd been fighting, not because she'd been afraid. After dinner, I found her organizing bills into neat stacks across the kitchen table. Urgent. Call tomorrow. Completed. Ask Ethan. I pointed at the last pile. You don't have to ask me everything. She looked up. I know. But I don't know what I don't know yet. I leaned against the counter. That's fair. She studied the paperwork for another moment before quietly speaking. This whole thing still feels strange. What part? She smiled faintly. Having a husband sleeping down the hall. I laughed. Technically, I have a husband trying to sleep down the hall. She laughed too. It was the first genuine laugh I'd heard from her. Neither of us noticed how natural it sounded. Neither of us realized that somewhere between repairing fences, paying bills, and sharing quiet dinners, our arrangement had already begun turning into something neither of us expected. The following week brought the first real test neither of us could avoid. Mason stayed quiet for several days. That worried me more than his threats. Men like him rarely gave up. They simply waited for the right moment. I was repairing a cracked water line behind my barn when I saw Olivia running across the yard. She was holding her phone in one hand and her hat in the other. She didn't even stop to catch her breath. "Ethan." I shut off the water valve. "What happened?" "It's Mason. He's at the ranch. Ray just called. He brought 2 men nobody recognizes." I grabbed a clean rag and wiped the grease from my hands. "What are they doing?" "They're walking the south pasture." I didn't need to hear anything else. "They're buyers." Her face turned pale. The same fear I had seen the night she knocked on my front door returned for just a moment. Not as overwhelming as before, but still there. I tossed the rag into the truck bed. "Let's go." Neither of us spoke during the drive. Olivia stared through the windshield while silently trying to steady her breathing. When we pulled into the Bennett Ranch, Mason stood beside the cattle pens with 2 men wearing expensive jackets and polished leather shoes. The first thing I noticed wasn't their faces. It was those spotless shoes. Nobody wore shoes like that on a working cattle ranch. Mason smiled the moment he saw us. "Olivia." Perfect timing. She climbed out of the truck. "What are you doing?" "Showing interested buyers around. This ranch isn't for sale." He laughed. "It will be, just as soon as this little marriage performance falls apart." Olivia's fingers tightened around her coat sleeve. I stepped beside her, not in front of her, beside her. Everyone looked at me anyway. Mason, the buyers, even Olivia. I kept my voice low. "It's your ranch. Tell them." She looked at me. Fear still filled her eyes. But something else had appeared beside it. Determination. She turned toward the visitors. "This ranch isn't for sale. I own this property. You don't have permission to bring anyone here." Mason laughed loudly. "You've been married for 1 week. Now you think you're a ranch owner?" "I am." Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. "You need to leave." One of the buyers shifted awkwardly. The other cleared his throat. Neither looked comfortable anymore. Mason's smile slowly disappeared. "Your confidence is fake. So is this marriage. When Ethan gets tired of pretending to be your hero, you'll be standing here alone. You can't manage this ranch. You'll never pay these bills. The workers don't believe in you." Every word landed exactly where he intended. I saw Olivia's shoulders sag for only a second. I wanted to answer. Instead, she lifted her chin. "Then you'd better leave." Her voice came out stronger this time. "Before you waste any more of their time." Silence. The buyers exchanged uncertain looks. Finally, one of them spoke. "Maybe we should come back another day." Mason glared at him before looking back at Olivia. "You'll regret this." "Maybe." She never looked away. "But I'd regret selling my father's ranch a lot more." Mason climbed into his truck and drove away fast enough to throw gravel across the driveway. The buyers quietly followed him. Ray watched from outside the equipment shed. For the first time, I saw him smile at Olivia. She didn't celebrate. The moment the trucks disappeared, she walked straight into the tack room. I found her leaning against the wall with one hand pressed against her stomach. "I thought I was going to throw up." "But you didn't." She laughed weakly. "That's supposed to make me feel better." "It's the truth." She looked down at the floor. "He's right about some things." "No. I don't know how to run this ranch. You don't know how to run every part of it. Yet." She looked back at me. "There's a difference. You learn one thing today, another tomorrow, another next week, Nobody wakes up already knowing everything. She stared at me for several seconds, then nodded. For the first time, she seemed to believe she didn't have to become her father overnight. That evening I returned from checking cattle and found dinner waiting on the stove beneath aluminum foil. "You cooked?" She smiled. "Don't get too excited." I lifted the foil anyway. "I'm already impressed." She rolled her eyes, but she couldn't hide the smile. The changes between us happened quietly. She stopped asking permission before making phone calls. She negotiated delivery dates herself. When she made mistakes, she fixed them without running to me first. She tore her jacket climbing through a fence. She forgot sunscreen and burned her nose during a long afternoon repairing water troughs. She spent more time outside than inside. One morning, Ray walked into the office carrying a clipboard. He looked directly at Olivia. "What do you want us working on after lunch?" He didn't even glance at me. She answered confidently. When he left, she looked at me. "Did you notice?" I did. He asked me. He sure did. She smiled all the way back to the truck. A week later, disaster struck. A strong evening wind damaged one of the lower pasture gates. Nobody knew exactly when it happened. Maybe the latch failed. Maybe someone forgot to secure it. Maybe someone opened it on purpose, without proof. There was no point making accusations. Ray's phone call came just after sunset. "Cattle are out on Miller Road." Olivia was already grabbing her coat before I finished hanging up. We reached the pasture within minutes. Nearly a dozen cattle had wandered through the broken gate. One stood dangerously close to the highway, while a delivery van waited with its hazard lights flashing. Rain started falling again, cold, heavy, merciless. Olivia jumped from the truck before I could stop her. "Stay wide," I shouted. "Don't chase them." "I know." She slipped almost immediately. Mud covered one arm. She climbed back to her feet without complaining. For nearly 2 hours, we worked beside Ray and several neighboring ranchers, slowly pushing every frightened animal back toward the pasture. One young steer suddenly turned toward Olivia. My heart nearly stopped. Instead of running, she stood her ground just long enough for me to circle behind the animal and guide it back toward the herd. When the final gate closed, everyone stood silently in the rain, breathing hard, covered in mud. Ray walked over. Water dripped from the brim of his hat. "You did good today, Olivia." She looked at him in complete surprise. Those 4 simple words meant more to her than every speech Mason had ever made. The drive home was quiet. Her jeans were soaked. Her hands were scratched. Her boots were covered in mud. She looked exhausted, but not defeated. Back at the farmhouse, I left clean towels outside the bathroom before making fresh coffee. A few minutes later, she walked into the kitchen wearing one of my old sweatshirts. The sleeves covered half her hands. She looked at herself and laughed. "I look ridiculous. You look like someone who earned dinner." She smiled before sitting across from me. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "Do you still see me the way I looked that first night?" I studied her. The frightened young woman carrying a soaked folder still existed, but now I saw something more. The woman who had stood up to Mason, the woman who had faced down frightened cattle in the rain, the woman who refused to quit. I slowly shook my head. "No, I don't." She held my eyes. The old farmhouse had never felt so quiet. Rainwater dripped softly from the roof outside. Neither of us looked away. She stood first. So did I. There were no rehearsed speeches, no complicated explanations, only 2 people who had spent weeks fighting beside each other. When she stepped closer, I didn't move, and for the first time since signing that marriage license, our relationship stopped feeling like an agreement. It finally began to feel like a choice. The estate review was scheduled for Thursday morning. By then, nearly a month had passed since Olivia knocked on my front door in the middle of that storm. Everything had changed. She no longer asked permission before making decisions. The ranch hands came to her first. The suppliers knew her by name. Every bill had been paid on time. Every repair had been documented. Every challenge had made her stronger. Still, The meeting would decide everything. As we drove into town, neither of us said much. Olivia rested a thick folder on her lap. It was nearly twice the size of the one she had carried into my kitchen that rainy night. "You ready?" I asked. She smiled nervously. "No." After a moment, she took a deep breath. "But I'm going anyway." I smiled. "That's enough." The attorney's office sat above the town bank. Old wooden stairs led to a hallway that smelled faintly of coffee and aging carpet. Mason was already there. Dark suit, expensive watch, perfectly polished shoes. He leaned back in his chair like he'd already won. The moment we walked inside, he looked at me. "You brought your bodyguard." Olivia pulled out her chair before I could answer. "I brought my husband." Mason laughed. "You keep saying that word like eventually people will believe it." The estate attorney, Richard Collins, adjusted his glasses before opening the file. He had known Thomas Bennett for over 20 years. Unlike Mason, Richard couldn't be intimidated. He calmly looked around the room. "We're here to determine whether the conditions of Thomas Bennett's will have been satisfied, and whether Olivia Bennett Carter has demonstrated operational control of the ranch." Mason immediately leaned forward. "Let's stop pretending. This marriage is nothing more than a stunt." She panicked. She married the closest struggling rancher she could find. And now everyone is expected to believe she's suddenly qualified to run one of the largest cattle operations in the county. Olivia's hand tightened around the folder. I wanted to take her hand beneath the table. I didn't. She didn't need me to speak for her anymore. Richard looked toward her. "Mrs. Carter, would you like to respond?" The room became completely silent. A month earlier, she would have looked toward me. She didn't. Instead, she opened the folder. "Yes, I would." The first documents she handed across the table were paid invoices, feed deliveries, veterinary services, fuel receipts, equipment repairs, fence replacements. Every bill had been paid. Next came employee schedules, maintenance reports, supplier agreements she had personally renegotiated, roof repair estimates, livestock inventory, vaccination records. Then she placed several signed letters on the table. "These are statements from Ray Johnson and every full-time ranch employee. They confirm I have managed all daily operations." She continued without hesitation. "I also included letters from the feed supplier, the equipment repair shop, and neighboring ranch owners. They confirm that ranch operations have continued normally." Richard slowly reviewed every page. Mason let out a sarcastic laugh. "So what? You got people to sign papers? Congratulations." Olivia never looked at him. "I've never claimed to know everything." Her voice remained calm. "But I know this ranch. I know these people. I know every calf born this month. I know every fence we've repaired. I know every payment we've made. And I know one thing with absolute certainty." She finally looked directly at her brother. "This ranch is not for sale." The room became silent again. Even Richard paused for a moment before turning another page. For the first time, Mason looked uncomfortable. His confidence hadn't disappeared, but it had begun to crack. "You rehearsed that speech?" Olivia answered immediately. "No. I lived it." Mason leaned forward. "This is ridiculous. Dad wanted her protected. That's why he added the marriage requirement. He never intended for her to trap this ranch inside some fantasy." "No." Olivia shook her head. "He wanted someone beside me until I learned to stand on my own." Mason pointed directly at me. "And what about him? You expect everyone to believe Ethan doesn't want this property? He's been one bad season away from bankruptcy for years. He didn't marry you out of kindness. He married you because he needed your land." For the first time that morning, I spoke. "I don't need Olivia's ranch." Mason smiled. "Really? I already have more land than I can afford." I leaned forward. "You think everyone has a price. I don't. He folded his arms. Then why did you marry her? I looked toward Olivia. Because now. The answer was different than it had been 4 weeks earlier. When she knocked on my door, I thought I was helping her save her father's ranch. I paused. I didn't realize she would change my life too. The room remained silent. I continued. Thomas Bennett believed she needed someone beside her. He was right. But only for a little while. I smiled toward Olivia. She doesn't need anyone speaking for her anymore. She earned this. Every acre, every fence, every decision, every bit of respect. She earned all of it herself. Olivia looked down for a moment. When she looked back up, her eyes were filled with tears she refused to let fall. Richard quietly stacked every document into a neat pile. He removed his glasses. Then he spoke. The marriage requirement has been legally satisfied. He turned another page. Based upon the financial records, employee statements, supplier testimony, and operational reports. He looked directly at Olivia. I find that Mrs. Olivia Carter has demonstrated full operational control of the Bennett Ranch. The estate will proceed according to Thomas Bennett's wishes. The Bennett Ranch remains under her ownership. For several seconds, nobody moved. Olivia closed her eyes, only for a moment. Then she slowly exhaled. Mason stood so quickly his chair scraped across the wooden floor. You'll regret this. He pointed toward both of us. You have no idea what's coming. Olivia met his eyes without flinching. Maybe. But if I make mistakes, they'll be my mistakes. And I'll never regret protecting Dad's ranch. Mason waited for her to back down. She never did. Finally, he grabbed his coat and walked out without another word. Through the office window, I watched him cross the parking lot. He carefully stepped around every puddle before climbing into his luxury truck. A minute later, he was gone. Olivia remained seated. Both hands rested quietly on top of the folder that had carried every piece of evidence proving she belonged there. Outside, the town carried on exactly as it always had. People crossed the street with grocery bags. A delivery truck unloaded supplies. Someone laughed outside the diner. Life moved forward. We walked down the stairs together. Standing beside my pickup, Olivia looked at the wedding ring on her finger. The ranch is safe. It is. She nodded slowly, then looked at me. You don't have to stay anymore. I knew exactly what she meant. The agreement is finished. You kept your promise. I'll never be able to repay what you've done. She smiled sadly. If you want your life back, I'll understand. A month earlier, I probably would have accepted. I'd have returned to my quiet farmhouse, my lonely dinners, my endless repairs, my life exactly the way it had always been. But somewhere between fixing fences together, late-night coffee, long conversations across the kitchen table, and watching her become the woman her father always believed she could be, something inside me had changed. I gently took her hand. I didn't stay because of a contract. She looked up. I stayed because somewhere along the way, you became home. Tears finally rolled down her cheeks. She laughed softly through them. So, she whispered, is this still a business arrangement? I smiled. No. It stopped being that a long time ago. She stepped closer. This time, neither of us hesitated. When we kissed, it wasn't because of a legal document. It wasn't because of an inheritance. It wasn't because anyone expected us to. It was because we had already chosen each other long before either of us admitted it. That evening, we drove back to the ranch together. The setting sun broke through the clouds, spreading golden light across the rolling pastures. The fence line between our two properties stretched toward the horizon, just as it always had. The difference was, neither of us faced it alone anymore. Thomas Bennett had wanted someone to help protect his daughter's future. In the end, He had given both of us something we never expected to find: a place to belong. If this story reminded you that love can grow from trust, respect, and standing beside someone when they need you most, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Thank you for watching.